Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the SpectrumCast. As you can see, we have one of our illustrious panel is out today. Tricia, we hope you are feeling better. Randy, thank you very much for joining us today. And Sean,
Sean.
good to have you all. Peace. So we wanted to continue the conversation we started last week. 6 key things to data resilience and building out a data resilience infrastructure. We talked about number one last week, and number one was that providing that level of administrative security from an application perspective and a people perspective who has access to the information. Number two is really all about identifying and monitoring in your environment. And you can kind of take that in multiple different places. Some would say in the NIST location, it's on your primary storage. In the data resilience space, we might talk a little bit about identifying and monitoring in the backup space. Sean, tell me a little bit about what you think about this ability to monitor your backup environment for threats and resilience.
Well, I mean, just playing off what you said, I think the most important thing is to monitor the primary storage and to catch the threats before they get into the backup environment. To me, that seems to be where the energy should be focused, at least for the most part.
Well, and it seems like the whole process of prevention, detection, recovery, resilience, the whole, which, as we talk about every week, the process itself continues to get sort of bigger and more robust and more rigorous in terms of what elements of your infrastructure you need to be plugged into and monitoring and looking at. So, again, I've sort of viewed this as a logical evolution of enhancing cyber resilience in an era when the attacks are becoming so much more sophisticated. So you can't afford to just monitor your network, or just monitor your endpoints, or just monitor your workstations. You've got to monitor every piece of data from the moment it arrives, at your doorstep until it ends up on a tape cartridge in Iron Mountain somewhere. Like you really can't afford to have any blind spots in that entire process, right? And this is just the latest example of that, I think.
So, I mean, with regard to that, I guess we kind of used to make the argument, and still do to a large extent, that well, we have this huge backup repository, or this huge repository of data that we're protecting. Let's try and take some load off our primary infrastructure by just looking at that, right? But I think the problem with just looking at that is by the time the data hits there, it's too late, right? Yeah. You already have an incident. Your primary mechanism for delivering information to your customers is already compromised, and you're in a recovery situation, which you don't want to be in the first place.
Well, yeah, and you don't want to get into a recovery situation and find out too late that you missed a step, right? A critical step somewhere along the way, which, in honor of Trish, means test, test, test. That's what we have to do all the time to make sure that doesn't happen.
I think you guys point out a good scenario, Randy, especially about you can't just monitor one component of your data. I think, we often hear competitors in the industry talk about, their solution around, hey, let's scan the backup and, I'm all set. Well, not really, right? I mean, what happens if the infection signatures change? Do you go back and do you rescan all old stuff you scanned before? Who knows, right? Yep. Catching that data right when it enters the environment and understanding if it's good or bad helps throughout the whole process, right? And that's one of the things I appreciate about IBM's kind of thought leadership around these six key steps to this process.
Well, and I suppose you could probably make a claim that the good news, if there is good news, or maybe the potential silver lining, is that as artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning have rapidly evolved and become more a part of, or more of a component of this discussion, that has mitigated some of the risk, right? So if you think about trying to expand the scope and reach of your monitoring and alerting and prevention, doing that, as a group of people or as a human monitoring that is not practical. Like there's no way you could reasonably do that and expect to, be successful. Whereas by applying AI and machine learning across the whole spectrum and the whole infrastructure footprint, you improve the probability of success and improve your ability to do it reliably, quickly, repeatably, hopefully before the real damage is done. So, it's a key area clearly where the rapid evolution of machine learning and AI has played a significant role. And here again, back to what, we talk about all the time. This is one of the big benefits that IBM brings to the table. The fact that we've got all of those domains covered in depth. So when we bring those methodologies and those domains together, you get a really robust solution.
Well, right. I'm curious as to you guys' opinion on this. I mean, I remember back 20 years ago when this sort of monitoring detection used to be very, very, very prominent, right? Mm-hmm. And nowadays, I mean, you'd think with all, and I'm not only talking specifically about IBM, but I'm just talking about in general here, you'd think with all the advancement in AI and pattern recognition, et cetera, that this would be old hat and would be easy. Mm-hmm. And yet the number of events that we're seeing with these type of things just seem to keep going up and up and up and be more and more and more. So what's happening?
Well,
right? Why isn't it working?
I think what's happening is that, and again, we talk about this all the time. It's a recurring theme. As the infrastructure becomes more sophisticated and intelligent and resilient, the attackers are becoming more sophisticated and intelligent and robust. We'll talk about an example here in a little while. It's amazing how sophisticated these malicious networks of hackers have become. I mean, it is a thriving business. It's a huge, growing global business enabled by sophisticated DevOps, by advancements in software technology and code distribution, by cryptocurrency. I mean, there's a lot of factors that are driving and fueling this massive acceleration of cyber threats. So to your point, Sean, yes, the infrastructure is getting better and smarter and more resilient and more, durable, but, so are the threats, right? So it's like a bacteria that evolves to, attack the host as its immune response builds.
And I also wonder, Sean, and this isn't an answer to your question, which is unfortunate because I think that question does deserve an answer, but maybe some rationale behind it, which is, you think back 20 years ago, like you said, they were doing this level of scanning, but how important, how critical was it to have sub-zero response time to your ATM transaction, right? And was that considered a consumer competitive advantage? And at the time, I don't know that folks were thinking about that. And I had the time and the cycles to kind of scan through my infrastructure set, my data set, whatever it may be. Threats keep coming. We start to evolve. We have this evolution of competitive advantage, and speed of delivery of things to the consumer becomes so important. Well, we don't want to have anything, slow that down. So let's stop doing those things. Maybe there was a space in time which the cyber threats weren't necessarily so crucial and as noticeable as they are today. Now we're where we are. Now what's the trade-off, right? Do I slow things down to be better, smarter, stronger, faster? Is that a competitive advantage, or is faster time delivery a competitive advantage? I don't know, but
yeah, it's like it's the innovator's dilemma, right? It's like we want to keep pushing the edge and pushing sophisticated processing and IT closer and closer to the end user, sitting on your device or on your PC or your TV or your toaster or whatever, which is awesome because it enables some incredible use cases and really our quality of life discussions. But that just introduces more and more risk and more attack surfaces that can potentially be, exploited. So yeah, I don't know how you answer that question. I think it's a question that just will continue to be unanswered. The only question is the degree to which, as an industry and as a society, I suppose, on some level, we evolve and adapt to undertake that level of risk and do so in a way that allows us to continue to kind of function. Because, the really scary scenarios, and you've kind of seen glimpses into it over the past year or so with some of these attacks, it's going to get to a point where the gloves will be off. Like there will be attacks on fundamental infrastructure, municipal utilities, financial systems that are going to be incredibly disruptive and are going to be like real existential threats, not just to companies, but to lives.
So one thing I wanted to point out just before we leave this topic, guys, and thank you very much. I think it's as all these topics are pretty interesting when you start to dive into each one. When we think about this space, this particular place in our 6 steps, right? The one thing I wanted to highlight is when it comes to identify and monitor, right? We've got a few things in the portfolio that are helping our customers kind of deal with some of these things that might at first seem really difficult, but not real. But today we're making it more simple. So, with the introduction of capabilities from our IBM security team, such as QRadar, we can now scan through the data as it hits the system, take a look at it. Every time it either gets changed or a malicious actor or someone different logs in, we can detect that and let the administrative team know, right? Things that we build into the Spectrum Protect portfolio, such as the ability to identify and see things such as pattern anomalies for ingestion rates and deduplication rates. And then some things we do with business partners, such as Predator, who actually can look at your backup data, find that infection signature, quarantine that piece of data, and then make sure that your final data set is kind of put back together in such a way that it's the last good data set of everything that you have. So when you recover, you can feel pretty confident. So just wanted to highlight, as you think about the portfolio and how do you support this kind of step in the portfolio or step in our process, these are some of the things that you can rely on. Randy, every week we talk about taking a spin on the wheel of misfortune, but interesting article we read this week having to do with some unintended consequences of some of these cyber threats. You want to shed some light on this?
Yeah, so this one is really interesting because it actually looks at the downstream effects of a cyber attack somewhat from the perspective of the attacker as opposed to the victims, right? Which is how we typically see it. And what's really interesting about this, and I won't read through the whole thing, but there are a couple of highlights that I thought was really interesting. So after the Colonial Pipeline attack, there were a lot of unpredicted, unintended consequences, whether it was, societal issues, the shortages caused, things like domestic violence increased because people were stressed out. There were people waiting in line for gas. I mean, there was rationing. There was a lot of things which quickly, spread out from the infrastructure attack on the Colonial Pipeline that resulted in, a much higher level of visibility and sort of scrutiny being placed on the attackers, right, than they're used to. And interestingly, they kind of retrenched and they actually issued an apology. They're like, hey, look, we didn't mean for that to be a societal problem, whatever our goal is, we're just in it for the money, essentially. They're not getting a lot of sympathy, obvly, but it was interesting that their whole...
We saw a business opportunity.
Like, hey, look, don't take it personally. Yeah, exactly. It's just a business. Don't take it personally. But interestingly, they then came up with, and this is kind of, it's funny, but of course it's not funny. It's kind of honor among thieves. They sort of got together as a group, and there are literally like industry consortiums of hackers now, which is fascinating to me. Including one that markets itself as ransomware as a service, which again is horrifying and funny. And they came up with some new rules like, okay, no attacks in the social sector. So no infrastructure, no healthcare, no education, and no government sector attacks. And again, it's not because they're altruistic, positive, aspirational people. It's because they don't want to get, drone attacked, quite frankly.
Bad for business, they're right?
Yeah, well, it's bad for business and it's potentially bad for their health, right? Because they're very close in many of these cases to triggering an event which will result in actual, shooting people war, not just cyber war. So, and interestingly, they highlight 2 reasons why the stress level or the caution level within the community is rising. Number one, everything is interconnected. So again, using Colonial Pipeline as an example, they went to attack one target, with the goal of financial gain and ended up resulting in all of these sort of downstream side effects that they didn't anticipate. And the other thing is that the tools themselves, and we talked about this earlier, are becoming very, very sophisticated and much easier to access. So you can literally like sign up for, Hackers R Us service like AWS, access the most sophisticated crowdsourced ransomware in the world and start using it. Give them your credit card number. It's literally become like a turnkey operation. So it does set up some really, really interesting and, again, deeply disturbing discussions to be had around, ethics, responses. A few weeks back, we talked about how governments are responding to these threats and the military implications and the national defense implications, national security and foreign policy implications. So, this is real stuff. I mean, this is becoming like a real this is becoming a real global destabilizing, set of events and slipstream. So, again, I say this all the time. I'll say it again. I feel privileged to be part of an organization that is confronting this head on and doing so in a way that not many others are or can. And that's pretty awesome, I think. But, we got our work cut out for us.
One of the interesting quotes that was in that article, Randy, and I think this really highlights this need for the identify and detect component or step within our process, is they say ransomware is no longer a human scalable problem. This goes to the heart of taking advantage of machine learning, AI capabilities to try to help detect some of this, because for the colonial pipeline, those unintended consequences were X, right? And that's they are what they are. Who knows what they're going to be when it comes to whatever you try to decide to do from a hacking perspective or whatever. So, and what those consequences in turn turn into down the line for you, right? So having those things, protected as best you can help avoid some of those consequences, right?
Well, and I mean, the sophistication and the reach and depth and capabilities of these ransomware consortia, I mean, they're not shy. They're telling us what's going to happen. I mean, they're giving us lots of advanced warning where this is going. I mean, you see it, to Sean's point, you see it every day. So, shame on us if we don't acknowledge that. And Sean, you talk about this because you've lived it for most of your career. Companies are reluctant to invest in this. It's not sexy. It doesn't generate revenue. It's not a competitive advantage. It doesn't get them, market share. It's just insurance. But if what's happened over the last 18 months doesn't convince you how important that insurance is, you probably don't deserve to be in business. So anyway.
Cool. Randy, thanks for sharing that. I think it's really important to kind of see both sides of what's going on. So, team, I want to thank you all very much for participating. And again, we're going to go through our six key steps in architecting a resilient infrastructure. Administrative security we did last week. This week was identify and monitor. Next week we'll cover pervasive encryption. Pretty simple, but you'll be surprised to see when you don't take advantage of encryption what can happen. I encourage all of you, the latest version of the 2021 cost of a data breach is available on IBM.com. Go look it up. Some really interesting information. And before we split, Sean, you want to give us a little headlights into TechU coming up?
So, yes, I just wanted to mention that IBM Technical University, which unfortunately this year is going to be virtual again, we wish it would be in person, but it's not, is going to be October 25th through 28th for the 2021 edition. And if you just Google IBM Virtual Technical University 2021, I think you'll find the link. Registration is open now, and we are going to have a lot of good sessions in there, a lot of deep technical sessions on IBM products and particularly data resilience. I should know because I helped recruit people, and I think all of the people on this call are going to have some sessions. So I highly encourage you to sign up for that and register.
Great, Sean. Thanks for pointing that out, and I'll put a link below in the video so that folks, I'll put a link below in the podcast so folks can see that and go register. So with that, looking forward to next week. And hey, everyone, take it easy. Have a good day.